Tonight's discussion focuses on the four-part series The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis, produced by the BBC in 2002. This series can be viewed on YouTube. Adam Curtis's acclaimed series examines the rise of the all-consuming self against the backdrop of the Freud dynasty. To many in both politics and business, the triumph of the self is the ultimate expression of democracy, where power has finally moved to the people. Certainly, the people may feel they are in charge, but are they really? The Century of the Self tells the untold and sometimes controversial story of the growth of the mass consumer society in Britain and the United States. How was the all-consuming self created? By whom? And in whose interests?
Well, I had I guess my first question was, has anyone ever heard of Edward Bernays before? And
Yeah.
that's what the first video is about him. And it's about, how the cultural, social, historical moment that made him, that he was able to exploit. And that was the creation of mass production, mass society, mass communication. All of that started at the beginning of the 20th century, and Bernays was there at the right time. And of course, he took advantage of Freud's theories. So I don't know what kind of questions. I mean, what were you surprised at that, or had you ever heard of him? And did you know that he had what influence he had? And like he was this shadow figure. He was the man behind the curtain, and no one saw him. No one.
Well, I have heard of him mostly because I had read a book. I picked up a book at Carmichael's first of the year that pretty much laid out his role in the early development of this mass influencing topic. And as I was telling Mike and Steve a while ago, the first introduction I had to that kind of activity was back in the 70s when there was a book called The Selling of the President.
Yeah.
It was about Kennedy's run for the presidency and his use of marketing techniques, but didn't really mention Bernays as I recall.
Yeah.
So Bernays was he obviously has his fingerprints all over this.
Yeah. It's interesting that in the documentary they don't use Kennedy as an example.
Yeah.
I mean, Kennedy said, it's the age of self, the century of self, right? And Kennedy said, ask not what you can do for yourself. But that is not Bernays. That is not an appeal to the inner hidden forces that are driving every individual, right? So I thought the selling of the president was about Nixon. It was about Kennedy.
It may have been Nixon.
Oh, okay. But anyway, so I don't know. I mean, all of Bernays' stuff was based on his acceptance of Freudian theory, right? Which is that deep within us, there is this hidden self, this unconscious forces that are really behind everything we do. And then what makes them so powerful is that we don't realize they're there. And if you could figure out a way to, and what Bernays is, I don't. Do you buy that? I don't really know what kind of questions to ask about this. What did you?
Yeah, I heard that Freudian theory. I'm not a psychology student, although I did subscribe to Psychology Today for a few years. But what I always the way I interpreted that was it's rather like understanding your biological forefathers. You look at animal behavior, and animals, act in their self-interest, unabashedly. There's no reflection that I'm aware of. And so the kind of egocentrism it's a basic unit of our biology. And you think of responses you have, the fight or flight response when you're under stress, or the response you have to sexual stimulation, or food, or other things. These responses are not part of your conscious self. They're
Right.
there all the time.
You don't think about it, they just happen.
Right. So rather than trying to tell someone how good your hamburger tastes, you show them a picture that makes them salivate, and then they'll buy the hamburger. So, if you recite the nutritional aspects of it, or
Yeah.
talk in the abstraction, that doesn't get the connection. And I think that's the difference. And it had to do, from my perspective, it had a lot to do with the media. Because as the Freudian theories were applied, new media was evolving, particularly motion pictures, which is what the Nazis used as a primary propaganda tool. The written word didn't sell Nazism, but the films they made did. And so we've carried on from there. So I think it's interesting to view history from that perspective of how a theory evolves along with the medium that it's exploited.
But well, do you know how Bernays got started? Do you know where Bernays' first job in government was?
I'm not sure if they mentioned that in the film or not. I don't know.
He worked with Wilson to create the propaganda that drove people to the isolationist pacifist America to get involved in World War I. I mean, there were some political events like that telegram that was uncovered. I don't know if it was real or not, that Germany was asking Mexico to join them, and Zimmerman, memo or whatever. But he was part of the group that developed the propaganda that that convinced Americans that Germans are an evil force in the world and they have to be stopped, and we have to do all we can to stop them. And they were so successful that the Boston Symphony could not play Beethoven during World War I. They would, they'd be booed out of they would not, there'd be such a hue and cry. Yeah. And it was very anti-German. And Bernays wrote a book. I haven't read it, but I've seen, there's some couple of good videos about YouTube videos about Bernays that presents his essential ideas in a very easy, digestible form. You don't have to read a book. But anyway, he was in on that stuff in the beginning to appeal to people, and he used the Freudian notions. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I know it's a great appeal to you Michael, you mentioned fight or flight. There is a great appeal to fear that seems to really motivate people to action, something that would threaten their self-preservation. And if you can link something with that, with that fear, you can get people to do stuff, and that's part of what I think he did, and working with this commission on, and he wrote a book called Propaganda. And at that time, propaganda did not really become a negative word until the 30s with Nazism. But up to that time, propaganda was just a way of influencing mass populations. And it was only later that it became associated with evil, But it's just another way of motivating people to act on certain ideas and principles and policies. So anyway, but so you have this in the first, and also it's interesting too. What was one of the problems that gave rise to interest in Bernays's ideas. What was one of the problems in the early 20th century? You had mass production, and you had a population that was being drawn together in cities. But the big worry of business was, we can produce ad infinitum. How can we keep people buying? You know, we produce too many goods and people won't buy them. And so that's how they got, that's how Bernays got, you know, how do you increase your consumer base? And of course, there's the famous example of how he made smoking, women smoking, acceptable. It's just brilliant, you know. And you see it today, you know, you want to sell something, give it to an attractive person, you know, a celebrity, and show them, you know, enjoying it and benefiting from it, and I'll try it. So that was amazing. I think he's evil.
I'm going to say I got the impression he didn't have a real strong moral code when I heard that part about him convincing women to smoke.
He didn't care. And you know what else he did? I don't know if this was in the video, but he got people to think of bacon and eggs as what to have for breakfast. Did you hear? Was that in there anywhere? I can't remember.
That was not in there, but a friend of mine who has worked in PR and as a journalist, when I was telling him about watching the series, and I went to him because I thought, if anybody's going to know who this Edward Bernays is, this my friend would. And of course, he knew right away, and he told me the bacon and egg story. But I had not. I don't think we saw it in the video. I think we got that from other channels.
Yeah, I think it was a video I saw on Bernays. There's a video on there's a video on how Trump got elected because he used Bernays ideas, and there's a couple of videos about Bernays himself and his theories and his. I mean, you know what else he did? But you know, his first job was with the government, but most of his stuff was with business, and most of his work was to benefit business. And I mean, the ultimate question is, are we citizens or are we just consumers? And who runs things? Is it politics? There are there leaders, democratically elected leaders that run things, or is it capitalism? Is it big business? Are they the ones that are really in charge? Because
well, the corollary, and I think that's something that's being picked up around the world now, is democracy functional when you have people who are convinced by emotional arguments, or you know, who are don't seem to be capable of making rational decisions in politics. Does that mean that democracy itself is inappropriate? You know, that's
or it's not possible.
Well, that's what the Germans concluded, because there was, you know,
there was too much. Well, remember when the Constitution was written, one of all the talk around Philadelphia was, there's too much democracy. We have to put some controls on this. We just can't have the masses. And then, you know, in that last episode, the tradition in politics in Great Britain was that a few privileged elite who knew better than everyone else would, you know, decide what was best for everybody and then convince them to do it. And there's this reaction. I mean, there's this anti-elitism, right? And the Trump, you know, and conservative politics, you know. So anyway, but is there anything, I don't know, I didn't think about questions in terms of separate episode, but is there anything about the first episode that struck you as true or odd, or did it make, I mean, it made sense that, you know, I mean, I guess it gives some credence to Freud, even though I know Freud has been very discredited, you know, with the birth of scientific psychology, where you have to have data and you have to be able to define your terms, then they have to be measurable, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Freud didn't have any of those scientific hurdles to go over, but he seemed to capture something that seemed to work, right?
I think that the concept of the deep psychotherapy has been pretty well debunked, and I don't know if there's very much of that going on these days. And that's really the essence of what Freud was trying to get to. He had his theory of what people are all about, but then he had his theory of how you're going to change people through the deep analysis and such. And I guess in the book or in the film, the suicides in his daughter's house and those kind of things, people who had gone through this sort of put a bad mark on that. And other forms of psychological or therapy influences have emerged. What I think resonates from that is the idea that we have impulses and we have a deep inner self that does influence our behavior, and emotions play a great deal of importance in that, and that we're not totally a rational person. And the amygdala can jump up at any time and really alter our perceptions and our behaviors. So in that sense, I think there's a contribution that he made in that. I have a statue next to my bed that I picked up when I was in England a while back, and it's a statue of a head that has all these zones drawn on the top. That phrenology, if you know what phrenology is, it's the study of areas of the brain that contain certain traits, and that's how far we've advanced from that. I keep that because it reminds me that whenever I think I've got somebody figured out, no, I really don't.
One question.
You think you got yourself figured?
Absolutely.
One question I'd like to pose to those of you who are more or have more in-depth knowledge of psychology is the distinction between psychology and psychiatry. That I always associate Freud with psychiatry,
right?
Assuming that someone is having they're dysfunctional, and so you're dealing with a dysfunction, whereas psychology doesn't necessarily imply a dysfunction. It's, you can be perfectly rational and perfectly adjusted and still have a deep psychological influence. So how do you make that distinction, Larry,
when my distinction today is that psychologists will deal with the deep inner traumas and such like that, and counselors as well. Psychiatry is going to be today I think it's devolved or involved into so you want some pills. It becomes part of the medical model that that you have
Let's take it over.
Yeah, you have a chemical imbalance or a chemical disruption somewhere that medicines and pills are going to help balance out, that can enable you to be in a position where you can deal with some of the issues that are causing you trauma and distress.
Well, is this on a sliding scale that, I may have a part of my own personal psychology may, form my temperament and the way in which I relate to other people? Is it just a sliding scale to when I go bonkers nuts on the other end? I mean, or is there a clear demarcation between someone who has a psychological issue and someone who has a psychiatric issue? Is it biological? I've always wanted to know that. I never hear that discussed.
My best guess is it's some of both. Okay, that your genetic makeup is maybe influencing how your brain chemistry is slightly different from somebody else's, and you're a little bit low on whatever the hormone is that keeps your spirits up. Well, you're going to be depressed a whole lot.
SSRI inhibitors.
Yeah. So medication that replaces that thing you don't have might be good, but then you have these other things going on in your head that you're trying to figure out. Your feelings were hurt. you lost something, you lost somebody, you got these things going on from your whole history. And those things, those problems are what I think of as part of your psychology. You know, how are you having that internal conversation with yourself about what's going on, as opposed to, you know, you have some condition that is medical, biological, that you need some kind of medication or other treatment for.
Yeah. It seems to me that psychology is more empirically based. Well, but yeah, what's it? Why, if you, is there a difference in going for therapy to a psychiatrist versus a psychologist? I mean, even I think psychologists can prescribe, PhD psychologists can prescribe medications, can't they? Yeah.
I don't know about that.
I think psychiatry started as a theoretical on a theoretical idea, a deductive idea based on Freud's experiences and his observations, and then just his reasoning. Whereas psychology, I think, is, like I said, more empirically based. And I think knowing about brain chemistry and what's wrong with brain chemistry and what can be done to correct that, to remedy the negative behaviors or the unsatisfying behaviors or whatever, is something that's based more on empirical evidence, on research. But it's a good question today. I think today probably most psychiatrists are more in tune with empirical evidence than Freud ever was.
Well, the real difference is about $100 an hour.
Yes. I wonder now, you know, kind of pushing this forward into discussion of how you influence the masses. Are you trying to influence people who have psychiatric problems? Are you, you know, do you use the same techniques to, you know, I mean, for instance, the January riot in Washington, were they recruiting crazy people, or were they just playing on the emotions of, you know, reasonably well balanced people? Well, where do we draw the distinction? You know, is we sometimes talk about folks who participate in that, and we shake our heads and say, you know, these people are nuts. Well, are they nuts, or are they simply being persuaded by propaganda to put them where they are?
It's a good question.
Can you make the distinction? Is it, you know,
which came first, the unbalanced individual or the leader who preyed on it?
I think in the Century of the Self series that they made it too simplified to think that what Bernays did was to do some kind of genius interpretation of Freud's theory and infect the masses. I think what he did, I'm sure he got his ideas from Freud's theory, I'm sure. But I think what he did, his own personal success, was about him being able to understand what would bring up somebody's desires, either for recognition, tribal membership, you know, sexual orientation, you know, personal attractiveness. There's all these things going on. And I think what we could credit Bernays for, and I'd never heard of Bernays, but I knew something like this was going on from a long history of seeing ads. They're trying to persuade us of one thing or another, that if we do this, we'll be happier. If we do that, we'll be sexier. If we do something, we'll be more handsome. And
I think it's so wishy-washy in the sense that the appeal is not to any specific thing. I mean, these inner Freud's notion of the id and the inner forces, I mean, some of it's sexual, some of it's power, but it's very ill. Bernays did not seem to be concerned with what it was. He just thought that there's something in people that they're unaware of that will cause them to want whatever it is you're trying to get them to want. And
And I
that
see
you just find a way to do that, to appeal to that.
he must have gone through a lot of trial and error to find
Yeah.
out how to do that
Yeah.
well.
I know later on they did try to define it. I mean, you remember I think it was in episode 3 that were, marketing companies started developing questionnaires and
Mhm.
and then they started collecting data, and then they used computers to process it, and they came up with types of people based on how they saw themselves as individuals and what they seemed to think would make them happy or make them satisfied or make them feel good. And that was an attempt to define these inner forces that seem so powerful and motivating us to do what we do. And then once we figure out what type is this an inner directed person, or is this a person who I forget the different categories that they talked about, but there were those categories, and they designed the advertisement to appeal to those categories, and it seemed, and the way they defined those categories, they gathered all this data from people and they fed it into computers, and computers saw what was similar. And
I was really struck by the fact that rather than having programs or communications designed to change people, which is, I thought, was more of Bernays' thing, that came down to, well, let's find out what influences the people and change our behavior in order to address that.
what do people want?
Targeted.
Yeah,
Right.
or come up with new products because their tastes change.
Mhm.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
my impression was Bernays never dealt with individuals. He was not interested in the individual consumer. He was interested.
Yeah.
in
When did
market.
when did the focus group start? Was that
In psychology? I assume it was post-war, but
they were hiring psychiatrists though
Right.
they weren't hiring
Right.
PhDs, they were hiring psychiatrists to develop these focus groups and to create the questions. What questions you ask people to ferret out what they really think, what they really feel, what they really want.
No.
In fact, that you try to get them to express what they've never expressed to themselves.
That was post-war, I think, is when they were interviewing all these soldiers who are coming back with various degrees of what we would call the PTSD.
Yeah.
And trying to get a sense of what was going on with those folks. I suspect that they had huge suicide rates back then that nobody wanted to talk about, and they were trying to figure out what to do about it.
Had you ever heard of a government program to encourage psychological health in the 50s? That really surprised me. I didn't know that.
I'm not sure we have it today.
They tried to bureaucratize happiness, but I mean, and I think you're right. It was a response to all the trauma. I mean, my wife worked for a while at the VA. She was a physician, and she had guys in there from World War I that were still having nightmares about what they saw. Deep trauma. And
Well, I find the whole idea of the focus group interesting. That one of the things I think I mentioned in a previous discussion about my negative attitude toward the Clintons, and this helped me to define why I felt so negatively about the Clintons, because they surrendered to the idea of focus groups and mass marketing and trying to manipulate people, rather than convince people of the efficacy of their policies. It was all about, well, the other side. Clinton said, "What doesn't matter what you think of you if you lose."
Yeah,
and
we're putting the cart before the horse, right?
Well,
they weren't leading; people were leading.
It's fine. It's fine to win the election, but if you've sacrificed your principles in doing so, what's the point? So I think that was very interesting that they targeted the undecided voter.
Right.
And that's this very, clever way of doing
Yeah.
it. You figure 40% of the people on either side are never going to change. They've already, they
Right.
are going to vote the way their parents voted and the way they've always voted. But there's a group in the middle, which is probably getting smaller and smaller now, of undecided voters. They're the ones who determine the outcome of the election. And
the
so,
irony is, you think undecided. If you want to appeal to undecided, you would use reason, to get them to decide that your policy is better than the other policy.
not necessarily.
And they didn't. They said, no, it's nothing to do with reason. We'll just make them think that we're giving them what they want. We'll figure out what they want, and then we'll couch our campaign and using those words and phrases that they'll say, oh yeah, that's what I want. I'm going to vote for him. He makes sense.
Well, what they're really doing is not reason in the sense that our policies are greater than my opponents. There's just here's a reason to vote for me because I'm walking around in hunting gear. Just like you.
It's not a truck and I got a gun.
Yeah. A practical reason. It's just an emotional reason. I'm like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's not enough credit in that series to our need to be part of a group, part of a tribe, a group.
Right.
And that there are drives there. So yes, I think everybody who has been brought up in America has been influenced by manipulative commercials. But I don't think that's your whole life. So that's where I felt they made it seem like the whole country was hypnotized by ads on TV or something.
I mean, yeah, it seems like tribalism is a secondary result. The first result is to make people. The first goal is to make people think that you're giving them what they want, and then as a result of that, people all get together saying, "Oh, we're part of this group. We're getting what we want. This guy's giving it to us, and we want to identify." They didn't talk about how it goes from the appeal to the individual to a mass to people people grouping together. I mean, they did all this research and created all these groups. I guess they were just helping people see that the group you're in is the same group they're in, so you should be with them. I don't know. They don't really explain that. I
think what we've seen in more recent days is that it's the negative politics that works better. It's easier for people to identify who they hate than who they like. If someone on the right now is, if you appear to be woke, as they refer to it, then we hate you. If you're, if you belong to this particular group, then we are united in our hatred of this other. So it could be immigrants, it could be blacks or Jews or any other ethnic group. It could be, liberals now have become a target, and you don't have to understand it. You just have to, for example, the critical race theory. If you ask people who are dead set against it to tell you what it is, they don't have a fucking clue.
They don't know what woke means.
That's right.
What does woke? They don't have to tell you. They've just been able to get all these negative associations around. This is the brilliance of Republican politics. They've always had a greater grasp of the power of language and how to manipulate language in such a way that I think the appeal is to fear ultimately.
Absolutely.
And I think that people and you feel safer if you're afraid of something. You feel safer in a group of people that think the way you do and agree with you, and there's safety in groups. So maybe that's where the tribalism comes in.
Well, tribalism has a tremendous feedback effect as well. If you're part of that tribe, and if you think you may be a little bit different, then your tribe is going to give you an ultimatum that you either I'm going to disapprove of you if you start drifting off in this direction. It's going to pull you back, and that's the nature of tribes. And I think that, that's one of the big challenges that we have on a lot of different issues like climate change, where people will believe incremental aspects of that, but the fact that their tribe does not holds them back from a full expression of anything that might support a policy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've made a joke, which it really wasn't a joke, but I've said for years that I think the one thing that has prevented us from having a second civil war in America is football, because people can take out.
Certainly is a way of
Well, you exercise your tribalism in an overt way. You paint things on your face. I mean, look at if you're an analyst looking at a crowd at a football game, don't you see the same kind of
it's a way to
craziness?
sublimate your aggression.
Yeah, it's your painted face, you're screaming, you're angry, and it's our team. And
Like
no one individual, or maybe some individual, most people are inhibited from doing that alone. But if they're in a crowd of 100,000 people, they don't cut loose, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think
I see a guy in body paint walking down the street unless there's going to a game.
Michael, the other part of that is that when you're at a football game, you're cheering for a team, you don't know which tribe that you're in. And you have people that are in the liberal tribe and in the conservative tribe cheering for the same thing.
Right.
And they have something in common there.
Yeah. But it got, I've said this about, I always translate this into local. And I think that one of the big reasons why the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville rivalry is so heated is that we were on different sides in the Civil War. And it's a way of expressing that again each time we play it. So it's red and blue. It's right there. The colors got mixed up, I think. But
have you ever listened to that show on NPR, The Hidden Brain? He did a program once that relates to tribalism. He talked about the appeal of getting likes on
Facebook,
social media, and he said it goes back to the tribal days when how good you would feel if your people saw you as somebody who pointed out a danger to them and kept them safe from it, or and people who that was a great service to the tribe, and so people who get all these likes because of some comment they made or some observation they made are people who are appealing to the other people's needs to, they feel like these people are helping keep them together, helping keep them safe, helping. I forget I hate getting old. I forget the term he used. It's like, I don't know, self-esteem, or it appeals, if everybody likes, why does everybody like what I'm saying? Because they believe that I've said something significant that makes them safer in some way, or makes them, more secure in themselves or whatever. And so I get raised up as important.
Yeah, and if you're someone like Donald Trump, you monitor those things very closely. And once you have, he used Twitter in the first election as a focus group.
Yeah, exactly.
He would see what the responses were, and then he would double down on that at his next rally, and he kept playing it because he has no, there's nothing in him about, he doesn't have anything that he really believes in.
No.
It's all
hollow. He's a hollow man.
He's transactional. It's what can you accomplish? Yeah.
What makes me important? What makes people like me? What makes people follow me?
Right. I think it's fortunate for us in a way that all of that attention of that tribe has been on Trump, because I don't think he will have a viable successor. I don't think someone can take that role. And so I'm hoping when he dies, and I hope it's soon, that there won't be someone who can pick up the mantle and go. I don't think his kids can. I don't think somebody like Ron DeSantis can. You know, he's kind of a unique individual, and the MAGA movement will die with Trump. At least that's my hope. But you know, it's interesting. I've been using social media quite a bit recently, and I go out of my way not to put my name or my face on anything.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to respond to other images and other words and not to me, because I realize, you know, some people may think I'm okay, but other people are not going to think I'm okay. So I don't want to associate the cause I'm working with myself too personally, lest I turn people off.
Well, do you think people are responding to Trump as a person? Because he's not a person. They're responding to what he's saying. They're responding to his ideas, aren't they? Or to his vocalizations. I don't know.
But it becomes incorporated in him. You know, you know, the Nazis didn't say, you know, Heil to the fatherland. They said Heil Hitler, and they focused that attention on him. And I think that, you know, it's not because they wanted to do it that way. It's because Trump wanted them to do it that way. It wasn't about his ideas prevailing. It was about him prevailing.
There is a short video that was listed along with the other ones on Bernays, and it was how Trump used Bernays' ideas to become president.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you know, like Twitter was, well, like you said, Twitter was the focus group, and I don't remember everything, but it might be something you might want to look at. Just Google Bernays and Trump, and I'm sure you'll find it's like an 8-minute video or something.
You know, if there's anything, Mike mentioned DeSantis, and if there's anyone that I think that is using the concept of the practice of focal groups or focus groups, it is him, and the policies that he is pushing, and essentially the concepts, or whatever you want to call it, in Florida, of picking up this little fear or this little issue from this particular group of people and trying to turn it into laws or issues or persecutions and such. And it's working for him. He's elected by a landslide in November. So he seems to have gone full tilt on this. I know the pundits think that, you know, they're going to use cultural issues a lot. He's going to use cultural issues more than any of it in policy. To try
if this is working for them, would it be wrong? Would it be immoral to employ the same techniques from the left?
Well, let me ask you a question. What did you think of how Clinton got elected in his second term? What did he do? He used, you know,
well, that's why
welfare. We're going to lower your taxes. This is what he took. What the Republicans were saying, put it in an appeal to people's self-interest.
I was thinking more on the lines of the culture wars. That how can you turn that on its end? That, you know, do you do it with celebrity? Do you get you know?
I don't know. I'm not a strategist. I'm not a political strategist, and I don't have a lot of interest in that, to tell you the truth. I'm more concerned about what's good and bad, not what works. But it's a good question, Michael, because it seems like, and I've read this, you know, like Republicans win because they encourage because there's something that we have to join together and fight. There's something that's dangerous, that's threatening us, and if we come together and fight it, we'll be better off. And Democrats lose because they say, well, we've got a lot of solutions for this problem, so people don't care about it. That doesn't motivate people to vote. What motivates people to vote is fear of something threatening them, and that if we get together, we can fight it. So the Republicans will fight this, you know, they create, you know, wicked Hillary, fight that, you know,
And I think in this last election, that the Democrats, the first time in my memory, used fear. It was fear of the loss of democracy.
yes,
It was the
yes,
fear of the loss of women's rights
yes,
that were the key issues there that I can identify. And those weren't even imaginary fears like that the Republicans gin up. It works. You know, the reality is that national elections turn on very thin margins.
yeah,
I think that only 5 or 6 or 7 states really matter, the swing states.
right,
And if you were to take 4 of the closest margin states in the 2020 election and flip them to Trump, he would have won.
yeah,
And that the total votes he would have needed was around 80,000
yeah.
out of 160 million. So the question is it rational or is it moral to play on real fears like I think the Democrats did in this last election? I think that we have no choice.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way, but it is true. They ran on the platform that Trump and the Republicans are a threat to democracy.
Well, I think they need to do more along that line. I don't know whether it's to accentuate the fear, but to identify yourself as a protector. And one of the things that I have been saying for years, and I do this, I put a flag up on the front of our house. A lot of liberals have given up on flying the American flag because they think this is what the opposition plays on. That you hate the flag, you hate America, and I think all we need to do is cover ourselves with flags. I mean, it's just a damn piece of cloth. Pile of fucking flags in the world, put them everywhere, and identify that with the Democratic Party. To give it up, to surrender it. I mean, literally, you're surrendering the flag. Yeah. So if you want people to see you as the American solution, don't break with the symbolism. It's clear. If you go to a confrontation, you see one group waving American flags and the other group not. Which side is which? Yeah. Pretty easy to tell, But I've always said you should not do that. Just wear the red, white, and blue everywhere.
Well, if you look at images from Democratic convention, it's all red, white, and blue. People. I mean, it's not much different than the appearance of the Republicans in their convention. But I guess I don't know. I guess it comes down to. I don't know. Yeah,
it's not on the back of our pickup trucks.
No.
Yeah. I get scared when I see you see a lot of this in Georgia, a pickup truck in the middle of nowhere on an interstate flying 2 huge American flags. It's not Patriots Day, it's not 4th of July, it's just but
that's what I want to take away from them. You neutralize it by
you assume when you see that this was a Trumpy.
Right. And so don't let that assumption ring true.
There was I thought the last episode kind of brought it all together and summarized things, and it ended on a very negative. I thought it ended on a negative note.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the ultimate question is, are the initial assumption? I mean, I guess if you look at the way democracy was constituted in the United States in the 18th century, it wasn't really democracy as we think about it, and it legalized slavery. It made all these compromises just to get people to vote for it, and it did not include women, it did not include people of color, it did not, but so what this thing seems to be saying is that well, it seems like one of the assumptions of democracy is people are basically good, and if you give them the chance to decide what is best for society and themselves, they'll choose the right thing, but I don't think good or bad has anything to do with it. It's your deep inner, they seem to me, it's your deep inner psychological drives, your unconscious fears and needs that is really what's running the show. And you can be as rational and reasonable and practical as you want, but if you don't appeal to these inner psychological needs, people won't go out and vote. I remember someone canvassed, for the runoff election here, between Warnock and Herschel Walker, and he said, I've been to a lot of places. He was only talking to Democrats. He was just going to Democrats, and then he was, seeing if they. And he said, I couldn't believe how many people didn't even know there was a runoff.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's not part of the.
We're distracted by our material desires, and we don't really care about the bigger issues. We just care about what will itch my scratch, what will get me off, what will what will make me feel good. Personally,
Yeah.
at this very moment, what will satisfy me right now. And I think, we've forgotten the whole idea of a commonwealth. I mean, there's a lot.
One thing along those lines I wanted to bring up tonight, maybe for some future discussion, is you can see how things have evolved. Taking Freudian principles and moving them through the 20th century, you end up with the Clinton administration. Well, carrying it forward, we have another new dimension that this film didn't address, because this was made around 2000, it aired in 2002. And although we had internet then, it was nothing like what it is now. Social media was really not all that active in 2002. And what we have now is a siloing of folks who are, you do a focus group to see what people like, and then you start doing, responding to that. You don't need focus groups anymore. Everything you do is recorded. Everything you do in any kind of media is recorded. All your purchases are recorded, all your conversations, everything you're doing. So all you need is the algorithm, and you can figure out what to do. And then you can channel targeted marketing towards that group of individuals. That's how Trump won, with Analytica doing the work in England.
And Obama did that. Obama tried. I mean, they tried to target people in their ads and stuff.
Right. Well, it's come to fruition now, and I'm wondering going forward. It used to be you would see the opposition's work. If you watch TV ads, you still see it. But on the internet, how often do you watch right-wing propaganda on the internet? I don't.
But if you Google, if you ask a political question, what are you going to get? I'm going to get all liberal ideas.
Sure.
I'm not going to get it. I think one time my brother and I were arguing about something and said, "Well, did you see this thing?" And I Googled the topic, and it didn't appear in my search.
No.
Because the computer has identified me as liberal, so they're not going to feed me any information that's contrary to how they define liberal.
Yeah.
It's hard to find stuff. It's hard to find stuff that's different than how you've been typed by the algorithm.
I'd like to look for some more, how do these ideas, again, starting from Freud and moving through Bernays and all the way toward the end of the century, how is that being played out now? Because it's really hard to see what's going on at the moment. We don't know, again, how Trump is and his team are manipulating things now. They're not going to use the same technique they used in the last two elections. They're going to go for something new, and it's going to be more sophisticated. And yeah, I'd love to see a follow-up on that.